Mary Caldwell felt it in her chest as she stepped onto that street. She had arrived just before noon, when the town was busiest and cruelest. The light above Red Hollow was sharp, almost metallic, the kind that flattened shadows and made people squint at one another like they were being sized up for purchase. Dust clung to her skirts and crept into the seams of her boots with every step. She held a cloth bundle tight against her body, fingers numb from gripping it too long. It was all she owned now. Everything else had been sold, buried, or left behind with a man who would never wake again. Widow. The word was never spoken aloud, but it announced itself in the way eyes lingered too long, then slid away. In the way women straightened their shawls when she passed. In the way men looked at her, not with desire, but with calculation. Mary kept walking. Her boots stopped in front of a two-story building with peeling white paint and narrow windows. Red Hollow Boarding House, the sign read, though the letters were faded enough to look uncertain of themselves. She took a breath and went inside. The air smelled of boiled cabbage and old soap. A woman stood behind the counter, thick arms, tight mouth, eyes that had learned to say no before the question finished forming. "I'm looking for a room," Mary said. The woman didn't ask her name. "You got money?" Mary shook her head. "But I can work. I can cook, clean, wash." "Everyone can work," the woman interrupted. "Rooms cost money." "I just need one night," Mary said, her voice thinning despite her effort to keep it steady. The woman finally looked at her properly, at the worn dress, the sunburned hands, the eyes that had cried themselves dry days ago. "This ain't a charity," she said. "Try the church." The counter thumped as the woman turned away. Mary stood there for a moment longer than dignity allowed, then stepped back into the street. The church offered sympathy and nothing else. The general store offered nothing at all. A saloon keeper leaned too close and suggested arrangements Mary refused to imagine. With every door that closed, Red Hollow seemed to grow tighter, like a fist. By late afternoon, shadows stretched long across the town, turning people into silhouettes and faces into masks. Mary's legs ached. Her mouth was dry. Hunger sat in her stomach like a stone. She reached the edge of Red Hollow without realizing it. The buildings thinned. The noise faded. Ahead lay open land, brown, unforgiving, stretching toward low hills that shimmered under the heat. Off to one side stood a ranch house, larger than anything else nearby, its dark wood stark against the pale earth. Mary stopped. She knew this place. Everyone did. "That's Rourke's place," someone had muttered earlier when Mary asked where the road ended. The name carried weight. Caleb Rourke, rich rancher, dangerous man, a man who kept to himself and liked it that way. Stories about him shifted depending on who told them. Some said he'd shot 3 men over water rights. Others claimed he'd once dragged a wounded boy 50 miles through the desert to save his life. The only thing everyone agreed on was this: Caleb Rourke did not open his door to strangers. Mary stared at the ranch house as the light shifted from harsh to gunmetal gray. Her heart thudded so loudly she was sure the desert could hear it. If you go there, her mind warned, you may not come back, but if she didn't. She glanced behind her at Red Hollow. The town had already decided she was done. Mary squared her shoulders and walked toward the ranch. The gravel crunched under her boots, each step sounding louder than it should have. The fence gate was heavy, its hinge rusted but solid. She pushed it open and followed the path to the front door. Her hand hovered in the air. She thought of Thomas, his laugh, his gentle way of touching her arm when he spoke. She thought of the fever that had stolen him in 3 days flat. She thought of the empty bed and the long road that had led her here. She knocked. The sound echoed in the hollow quiet. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard footsteps. Slow. Measured. Heavy enough to suggest a man who did not hurry for anyone. The door opened. Caleb Rourke filled the doorway like a figure carved from the land itself, tall, broad. His dark coat hung open and a gun rested easy at his hip, worn not for show, but for use. His beard was trimmed but rough, streaked with gray like old scars. His eyes were the hardest part, not cruel, just alert. The eyes of a man who had learned that hesitation could cost lives. "What do you want?" he asked. Mary's throat tightened. For one terrifying second, she could not make her mouth move. She swallowed. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you." His gaze dropped to the bundle in her hands, then returned to her face. "You lost?" "No." That earned a flicker of interest. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said quietly. "I was told you might need help around the house. I can work for my stay." The wind stirred behind her, lifting dust along the path like a warning. Caleb said nothing. The silence pressed down on her until she felt foolish for ever knocking. "You afraid of me?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. Mary considered lying. It would have been easier. But something in his eyes told her lies would be wasted. "Yes," she said. "Then why come here?" "Because I'm more afraid of what happens if I don't." Caleb studied her again, slower this time. He saw the fear but also resolve, the kind born from loss. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. Mary froze. "Sir?" "You can stay. For tonight." She crossed the threshold with her heart hammering, convinced one wrong move could end everything. The door shut behind her. Caleb's voice followed, firm but not unkind. "From now," he said, "you're my guest." Mary nodded, gripping her bundle. She did not yet know whether she had been spared or claimed. But Red Hollow watched from a distance as the door closed, unaware that a story larger than rumor had just begun. The first night inside Caleb Rourke's house passed without sleep. Mary lay on the narrow bed in the spare room, fully dressed, boots placed neatly beside the door. The ceiling above her was low and dark, the beams thick with age. Every sound carried weight. The soft groan of wood settling, the distant cry of something wild out in the desert, the occasional step of a man moving through a house that had learned solitude too well. She listened for danger. That was what widowhood had taught her. To listen closely, to expect the worst, to survive it quietly. When morning finally came, it did not announce itself with comfort. It arrived as a pale gray light slipping through the window, sharp enough to wake her, but gentle enough not to accuse. Mary sat up slowly, heart racing, waiting for the memory of the night to rearrange itself. She was still here. She exhaled. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of metal touching stone. A kettle. Then the low murmur of a man clearing his throat. Ordinary sounds. Human ones. Mary stood and smoothed her dress, suddenly aware of how small she felt inside a house built for a man who filled space without apology. She stepped into the main room. Caleb Rourke stood at the stove, back turned, sleeves rolled up, coffee pot in hand. Morning light cut across his shoulders, outlining him in sharp contrast, part shadow, part steel. He moved with the efficiency of someone used to being alone, every action measured, no movement wasted. "You sleep?" he asked without turning. "A little," Mary answered. He nodded as if that was enough. There's coffee, he said. Bread on the table. She hesitated. I can cook. I know, he said, finally facing her. But you don't owe me anything. The words unsettled her more than cruelty would have. They ate in silence. Not an uncomfortable one, but a cautious quiet. Two people learning the shape of the same space. Mary noticed things as she drank her coffee. The way the rifle on the wall was kept clean and close. The scar near Caleb's knuckles, pale and old. The absence of anything soft. No pictures, no decoration, no sign that a woman had ever lived here. When the meal ended, Caleb stood. There are rules, he said. Mary stiffened. He saw it and paused, choosing his words. You eat when I eat. You lock the door at night. You don't wander the land alone after dark. If you work, it's because you choose to, not because you're buying your stay. She frowned slightly. And if I want to leave? He met her eyes. Then you leave. Something inside her shifted, just a little. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them spoke aloud. Mary woke early out of habit, sweeping floors that didn't need sweeping, scrubbing pots already clean. She baked bread that filled the house with a warmth it hadn't known in years. She stitched torn seams, washed dust from windows, and planted herbs near the porch where the soil allowed life to exist at all. Caleb never interfered. He worked the land from sunrise to dusk, returning with dust on his boots and the quiet exhaustion of a man who had learned to let labor speak for him. Sometimes he watched her from a distance, not intruding, not commenting, just observing. At night, they sat across from each other at the table. Sometimes they spoke. Mostly they didn't. Fear lingered in Mary, but it no longer screamed. It watched. She still woke at every sound, still kept her boots close, still measured his footsteps when he passed her door. But with each passing day, nothing happened. No raised voice, no sudden anger, no expectation she could feel pressing against her ribs. One evening, as the sky burned red and purple beyond the windows, Mary's hands began to shake while she washed dishes. Caleb noticed. You all right? He asked. She tried to answer, but her voice failed her. The memory came uninvited. The way Thomas had coughed that final night, the helplessness of watching life slip through fingers that had once been enough. I don't know how to be safe, she said finally. Every time things go quiet, I'm waiting for something to break. Caleb stood very still. You're safe here, he said. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. That's what scares me. He understood that better than she knew. Later that night, by the fire, he told her about his wife. Her name had been Anna. She had loved the land the way some people love the sea, fearlessly, recklessly, with faith that it would love her back. When she was killed during a dispute over grazing rights, the land didn't answer. Neither did the law. They buried her, he said, staring into the flames. Then they expected me to go on. Mary listened, heart aching with recognition. I didn't let anyone stay after that, he said quietly. Didn't see the point. Why me? She asked. He considered the question longer than necessary. You knocked like someone who had already lost everything, he said, and still asked instead of demanded. That night, Mary slept deeper than she had since Thomas died. But Red Hollow did not stay quiet for long. People noticed her absence, then her presence. Whispers traveled faster than wagons ever could. A widow living alone on Rourke's ranch, a dangerous man and a vulnerable woman under the same roof. Speculation turned sharp. One afternoon, Mary rode into town with Caleb for supplies. Conversation stopped when they entered the store. Eyes followed them. Judgments formed and hardened without words. Outside, a drunken ranch hand staggered too close. "So this is how Rourke keeps house now?" the man slurred. Mary felt the fear return, sudden and cold. Caleb stepped forward, his voice low and calm. "You're done here." The man laughed, hand drifting toward a gun that didn't belong to him. "Leave," Caleb said again. The authority in his voice was not loud, but it was absolute. The man left. Mary stood frozen until the danger passed. Only then did she realize her hands were clenched into fists. "You didn't have to," she began. "Yes, I did," Caleb replied. On the ride home, she understood something important. He wasn't protecting her because she was weak. He was protecting her because she mattered. That night, as the house settled into its familiar quiet, Mary sat on the porch watching the stars stretch endlessly above the desert. For the first time, fear did not sit beside her. Hope did. She did not yet call it love, but it was walking toward it. The change did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, the way morning creeps across the desert, slow, almost unnoticed, until suddenly everything is lit. Mary realized it one dawn as she stood at the porch rail, watching Caleb ride out to check the eastern fence. The horse moved steady beneath him, familiar with his weight, his silence. He did not look back, not because he didn't care, but because he trusted the world behind him. And for the first time in years, Mary realized she trusted it too. The fear that once followed her like a shadow had thinned. It still existed. Fear always did, but it no longer ruled her steps. In its place was something gentler, stronger, belonging. Red Hollow still whispered. Of course it did. Towns like that survived on stories the way the desert survived on stubborn weeds. But whispers lost their teeth when they went unanswered. Mary rode into town alone now. She spoke plainly. She looked people in the eye. Some softened, others didn't. It no longer mattered. At the ranch, life settled into something that felt dangerously close to peace. Evenings became longer. Conversations deepened. Sometimes they spoke of small things, weather, cattle, repairs that needed doing. Other times, silence carried meaning all its own. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's wounds. One night, a storm rolled in fast and angry. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows like a warning shot. Mary startled awake. Breath caught in her throat, the old terror rushing back without permission. Before she could stop herself, she stepped into the hallway. Caleb was already there. He stood barefoot, shirt thrown on hastily, concern etched deep across his face. "You all right?" he asked. Mary nodded, though tears burned her eyes. "Storms sound like endings." Caleb hesitated only a second before opening his arms, not demanding, not expecting, just offering. Mary stepped into them. It was the first time he held her. His embrace was solid, careful, as if he understood how easily broken things could be. She rested her head against his chest, listening to a heartbeat steady enough to believe in. "I won't let anything take you," he said quietly. She believed him. The words that followed were never rehearsed. They came weeks later, on a morning as ordinary as any other. Mary kneaded dough at the table, flour dusting her hands, sunlight cutting clean lines across the floor. Caleb stood nearby, hat in his hands like a man preparing for something harder than any gunfight. "I've been thinking," he said. Mary looked up. He cleared his throat. I won't insult you with pretty words. I'm not good at them. She smiled softly. I know. I won't promise you a life without hardship, he continued. This land doesn't work that way. I know that too. He met her eyes then, really met them. But I can promise you respect, protection, a home no one can take from you, a name that carries weight instead of whispers. Her breath caught. And love? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Caleb swallowed. If you'll have patience with me, I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. Mary didn't cry. She laughed, a sound light and full, the kind she thought she'd lost forever. I already love you, she said. The words settled between them like truth finally finding its place. The wedding did not impress Red Hollow. That was precisely the point. No grand announcements, no borrowed finery. Just a small gathering beneath an open sky. A preacher who spoke plainly. A ring worn thin from Caleb's mother's hand. Mary wore a simple dress she stitched herself. Caleb stood taller than usual, hat held respectfully to his chest. When the preacher asked if she took this man, Mary answered without hesitation. When Caleb spoke his vow, his voice did not shake. I will stand between you and harm, he said. Every day I breathe. Red Hollow watched. Some nodded. Some scoffed. Some realized, too late, that something rare had taken root just beyond their reach. Mary Caldwell became Mary Rourke. The name fit her like it had been waiting all along. Life did not turn soft overnight. Ranch work remained hard. Winters still bit deep. The land demanded respect and labor in equal measure. But the house was no longer empty. Laughter returned to its walls. Lamps stayed lit later. Flowers grew near the porch where Mary coaxed them to survive. Caleb changed too. Men noticed. The sharpness eased from him. His voice carried less threat and more certainty. Where once he had built fences to keep the world out, now he built them to protect what mattered. Years passed. Children followed, 2 boys who ran wild through tall grass, and 1 daughter who inherited her mother's quiet strength. Red Hollow adjusted, as towns always did, rewriting its stories to fit the truth it could no longer deny. The desperate widow had not been claimed by danger. She had found refuge. She had found love. And a man, long thought hardened beyond hope, had learned that some doors, once opened, change everything. As the sun dipped low beyond the hills, Mary stood beside Caleb on the porch, watching their children chase fireflies in the fading light. She thought of the night she knocked on a stranger's door with nothing but fear and a bundle in her hands. And she smiled. Because sometimes the place you go to survive is the place you learn how to live.